Kristy, welcome to the Dark Night of the Soul Unwrapped.
Hi.
We were just saying you've had successive dark nights of the soul. What's your sense of the first one now, looking back on that? Because that happened when you were a child.
Yeah. It's interesting because I would say what happened, it was like in a lot of ways a very classic dark night in that I became really depressed. I became really disillusioned. I was 10 years old. Like, I wasn't, um, it's not like I had an extremely sophisticated view of the world or myself, but I really started to go into, really extreme anxiety, chronic suicidality, and uh, I really grappled with a sense of feeling like I didn't want to be human. I didn't want to be here. And as a child, I was kind of like experiencing that with different ways of thinking about myself. But in a lot of ways, it was just really feeling like really like I didn't have a sense of like goodness that I could trust anymore. And I kind of never came out of that. And I think I thought I did because things did slowly get better, but a lot of those improvements had to do more with a change of circumstances, like, leaving my childhood home, going to college. There were ways in which I got a little more agency and things kind of improved on that level, but I kind of never came out of it. Continued to struggle with a lot of those same symptoms. And I think underneath that, what I'm realizing now is I continue to struggle with that base level of like lack of trust in life. Um, and it wasn't until more recently, like around 30, and then again, another one in the last like 3 years or so, that I've experienced dark nights that I think fit some of the more classic descriptions of them. But I'm realizing I was actually and am coming out of what has been like a 30-year dark night, basically. And it's just been the sort of this rough turbulence of coming out of that state that I just normalized for so long and kind of became my baseline, if that makes sense. Yeah.
That does make sense. I mean, I imagine when that happens when you're 10, you don't really know, there's not much else prior to that.
Yeah.
So at that point, was there some kind of, I mean, it sounds like there was also that deeper existential layer of what was going on, what we might call soul or spiritual in some way. What was your sense of that at that age?
Yeah. I mean, at that age, there was actually a very distinct event that kicked it off. And I know I've talked to you about this before. It was the death of my dog. And my dog was like my attachment figure. He wasn't just a dog, he was my life raft to um to what I could say was kind of like God for me, like a sense of love that was reliable, that I could trust and felt safe with. And I remember when that experience happened, I was very angry at what I considered to be God, right? Like I I was very angry about it. Um I was raised Catholic, and so I kind of just went into prayer and was like, "I'm really angry at you. I prayed that this wouldn't happen, and you did this." And there was this kind of rupture in that way that, yeah, I never really quite came out of. There were several other things that happened around that time as well that just sort of compounded the rupturing, but that was really the initial rupture that happened. And in particular, the way that it happened, I don't necessarily need to go into that whole story, but the way that he died was actually some of what I was so upset about. Again, I was 10 years old, so it wasn't super sophisticated, but there was that trust in life that was ruptured. Yeah.
Yeah. So, as you say, then into your 20s, things seem to be getting better in some way, more functional, however we
Yeah.
describe that. What then happened at 30?
Yeah, so that's really interesting. So yeah, there was a kind of very like slow improvement. I started meditating at 18. I actually like really was into like inner work, mostly because I was suffering so much. It kind of felt like acts of desperation most of the time. And then a few weeks before my 30th birthday, I decided to do a somatic experiencing session with somebody locally. I was in graduate school to be a counselor and was studying trauma. And a few weeks earlier, I was in this course reading a textbook, and I suddenly realized I was reading about myself. And I was like, ah, I have trauma. I have trauma. I'm going to go work with somebody who does somatic experiencing, who was the person also teaching the course, had that background. So I went into this session with high hopes of being healed and fixed and, all of those things. And I got something more interesting, actually. I went into that session. We really kind of followed a very typical, if people have had somatic experiencing sessions before, a very kind of typical arc. I went into a memory that came up from a very young age. I cried. I, spoke to my dad. She prompted me to speak to my dad, who wasn't there, but worked that out. And it seemed like the session was over, and I had settled. My nervous system was settled, but I kind of went into this trance a little bit, and it wasn't even something I really registered as a trance. It was almost more just like I checked out a little bit. And I was fixated on this little tree, this little street tree outside the window of her office. And I just stared at it for a while. But as I was looking at it, I had practiced Vipassana meditation for a long time. So, like, there was a kind of natural tendency to do this. But I was tracking the body sensations I was having, as well as the thoughts at the same time. And it was as I was looking at this little street tree, it was moving very quickly. The body sensations were sort of this rapid, chaotic movement of sensations, and there were thoughts going, and I just sort of was like with all of it. And then I had this kind of quick visionary experience where I sort of sensed all of these trees, and I've always had a really strong connection to trees, and so I sort of sensed all of these trees in front of me, and they said something without words, but they kind of communicated something that was basically to the effect of what grows us is what moves you. And they just communicated this without words. It was just kind of a message or like a transmission or something. And it felt like they were basically pointing at the sky, saying something as obvious as like, the sky is blue. Have you noticed? But it was like this profound recognition of the most obvious thing. And I was like, I had no emotional response to this information whatsoever, but there was this profound recognition. And I just was like, oh, yeah, no emotion whatsoever. But it felt like a little click. Like, I always imagine it when I remember that memory, like a needle, or not a needle, but like a pin fell off a desk, like 10 blocks down the road and hit the floor. It was so, so subtle. I basically missed it as anything significant in the moment. And then the person facilitating me, the somatic experiencing lady, like leans in front of my vision and is like, "Are you dissociating right now?" And I was like, "Oh no, no, actually I'm very much here. Like, I felt very here." And then that was it. I felt great. I'm like, "Doop to do," left session. I actually remember after that, I hopped on my bike to go take care of some kids that I just occasionally babysat for. I got there, there was, the regular family that I watched, but then this particular day, there was another mom and some of these kids, their friends were there. So I was gonna watch all these kids. And this kind of thing typically would be very nerve-wracking for me. Both of these moms are kind of they're anxious, they're giving me all this information, they're, blah, 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 bombarding me, and I just felt completely mellow, like, just totally just this sense of grace almost, like, just this effortlessness, where typically I'd be like, "Oh god," And it was great. The rest of the time, I hung out with the kids, we had a great time, ran around, we're goofy. And then I got on my bike to ride home, and somewhere along that bike ride, I was like, "Wait, what was that?" It took
Right.
hours for me to even recognize that that was kinda weird, what happened. Um, but I felt great, so I'm like, "I don't know what that was." That was the weirdest this really weird thing I've never experienced before, but, whatever. And I proceeded to have a great couple weeks after that, like, really great. And I was like and a friend of mine was like who spent a lot of time around me was like, "You're kinda different." I was like, "Yeah, I healed my trauma." That's what I thought. So, yeah, so that was the one that happened, right around my 30th birthday, yeah.
I love the way that you describe that as like a pin falling off a desk, like blocks away, like it had that kind of subtlety to it.
Yeah.
And yet, such an enormous shift or
Mm.
whatever we want to call that. What then happened after those 2 weeks of grace?
Yeah, I wish they had lasted longer. That would
Yeah.
have been really nice. Yeah, so, then things started to get interesting. Um, Again, I had this meditation background, and so I was used to watching my thoughts. Like, I practiced I had fits and starts to some extent, but I had been practicing for quite a few years, and so there was one day where was, I remember in the parking lot of a local grocery store, and I had all this emotion that was coming up, which wasn't unusual for me. Like, I tended to kind of have this very tumultuous inner world. Um, so I had all these emotions coming up, and I had reclined my seat and was just looking out the windshield up at the clouds. And I was crying really hard, but I'm watching my thoughts and I'm realizing that there's something different happening. There's something that was different. And some of what I recognized was that it seemed like something old was resurfacing, which was kind of the first time I had ever caught that. Like, oh, I thought I worked through this. Oh, this is showing up again. But then I also was having this experience where I realized that I was very effortlessly experiencing my thoughts, seeing my thoughts, but not identifying with them in a way that was not the case prior to that. And so I just noticed that, like, really was like I felt more like I was this space than I was the thought for the first time after practicing since I was 18. I mean, so at that point it's like 12 years or so. And that was the first time I noticed, like, something's different internally. And then, I don't know, maybe a couple months or a month or 6 weeks or something later, so things continued to really actually go downhill for me emotionally. And it was weird. It was different than what I typically experienced. Like, things started to get kind of weirdly chaotic. I had an autoimmune issue flare back up. I started to experience shame in a way that also was unusual for me. Shame itself was not unusual for me, but this felt like it was shame for very random things, like it was just kind of come out of nowhere at the most just very strange moments. And even I would be like, this is unusual for me. I know I struggle with shame, but this is like, I'm feeling ashamed when I'm sitting with my supervisor in his office and I drop a piece of paper on the floor. I'm not usually that prone to this.
Right.
And I start getting images of myself that are very strange. At one point, I see an image of myself covered in blood. Like, just really things that were unusual. Yeah. So that was kind of the early part of that. And then I started to actually have experiences right around that time where, yeah, like I actually started to experience being able to get into a certain state that allowed me to release the tension in my body. So that was also different. Yeah.
What do you make of what was going on at that point? What's your understanding of the differences and all of that now?
Yeah. I mean, I think that yeah, how do I describe this? It feels like there was a threshold that was crossed in my system where my attention was no longer, because I don't want to say it basically kicked off a process of unraveling. What I would say wasn't just my entire life of tension, but like really many generations of tension. Um, and then I basically crossed a threshold where my awareness or attention was no longer fully attached to all of those patterns. It wasn't fully enmeshed or en- entwined with all of those patterns. Like there was suddenly a space there that wasn't there before. And it wasn't a space I had to try to find like I used to when I practiced. It was um, a space that was always there now.
Yes, I think there's two things in this that feel really important to flesh out a bit more. One is what you just said about many generations worth, and the other is what you just said about the space. I mean, in my experience of this space, it takes the difference between 100% identification, if we want to use that word, 100% being enmeshed and 99% enmeshed is that significant difference. My sense of, when we say we're not entirely identified, that allows for still being very, and it's not like we're talking some sort of detached position,
No,
right?
no.
That there's
Yeah.
something about that difference between completely identified and having just that little bit of space that comes in, and it's as if something that's previously been really rigid just loosens very, very slightly. It's that 1-2% that makes all the difference.
Yeah, because it kind of basically starts a process that, in my experience, you can't stop. You could maybe slow it, maybe, but I think a lot because I practiced Vipassana, they would talk about that all you needed to do, it was kind of like a rope that had been twisted, right? Like if you had a double stranded rope and you just kept twisting it, twisting it, twisting it until it was incredibly contorted and everything. And they said, all you need to do is stop. All you need to do is let go of the bottom of the rope and it will unravel itself. And that is my experience of it. It's just that one moment of letting go and the rope starts to unravel itself. And so that's kind of how I see it. Yeah.
You know, in the early days of my dark night, I literally had the vision of a rope doing that. I mean, I'd
Yeah.
never heard of Vipassana at that point, but the felt sense and the imagery that kept on coming in was exactly that, a coiled rope just starting to spin back round the opposite way. So my system was knowing the truth of that without having heard it from anywhere else. And that feels like such an accurate description that once that process begins, it's very clear it's not us doing it in any way,
Yeah.
right? It's just happening. And that what's being unraveled and the way that the unraveling is happening, there's probably not much relationship to anything we'd done before. It's like you said, old stuff was surfacing. And certainly for me, I'd have the same response. It'd be like, I thought I'd, dealt with, or whatever wording I used at the time. And it's such a different place, where that unraveling begins from, isn't it? That we could
Yeah.
never have guessed at the depth of what was previously inaccessible to us.
Yeah. And I think that's it. It's because it's a lot. It goes so much farther back than just our personal lives. And that the way that I have more recently come to understand it is, I mean, it's nature, right? Bringing us back into a natural state, which is an effortless process because it's natural, right? And that we're really undoing the effects of hundreds, maybe thousands of years of unnatural, um, I don't even want to say unnatural, but something that was forced. And so, yeah, to me, it just feels like, oh, right, this is just natural. This is just nature returning to more like homeostasis, and that a lot of that has to do with our social, um, I want to say something like empire or like society or these bigger social configurations that have been forced on us against our nature, right? And for hundreds, thousands of years, and they have not unwound. And so at a certain point, they start to unwind.
I think that's such a great description of it. And I think empire is a good word because it encapsulates that sense of power relations that are implicit in this, right? It has been and is a forcing, obviously with the use of force. I mean, we're seeing that
Yeah.
very, very large at the moment. When we're so used to, our perception, or certainly my perception was prior to the dark night, that the source of my struggles, my pain, my anxiety, and so on, was within my own private psyche, no, or at the most within the little family dynamic that was going on. And it took a long time to see that it wasn't a question of something being wrong with me in some way, that there'd been some, however that was conceived of in any given moment, that there might be something bigger going on. And the idea that what was happening in the unraveling of that rope was generational, or, however we want to describe that. I think it's quite a difficult thing to come to terms with, in a sense. I mean, we know the truth of it in our bodies and in our experiences of it often. But I think for me anyway, there was a time lag between different parts of myself. So I would be freaked out by it on a more mental level, even as I was experiencing it somatically and imaginally.
Yeah,
Was that
that's my experience too. Yeah. And I think that a lot of that mental freak out was the social conditioning that now kind of didn't know what to do with itself, right? I mean, there was such a gap between the experience I'm actually viscerally having, the shifts in perception that were sometimes massive, that were often I was conditioned to believe weren't possible or real. Um, and that conditioning, that mental conditioning, really not having much of a place to go yet, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like, particularly in those early years, it's freaking out because it doesn't have a place to go and because it doesn't. I mean, you were talking about trust earlier, I think it takes a while for any sort of sense of trust in the process to come in. I love what you said about it being natural and a return to our natural state, that this is this is evolutionary in my understanding now, and that there's something in us, and a thread, an intelligence that knows how to do that, right? That it's by following
Mhm.
that thread, which can emerge in so many different ways in different moments, that when we get a taste for that thread, as it were, when we have the experience of it a few times, and we begin to trust its movement, it feels like we become more aligned with how nature wants to move, as opposed to how our social conditioning would have us move or not move.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
One of the things that people often ask, particularly I think at the beginning of this process, is, and I mean, I know we'll both totally understand this, when will it end?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, what would
What
you say to that just now?
I don't think people wanna hear my answer to that. I mean, okay, I think it actually depends largely on the person and the background. I don't think that everyone's is the same, because we don't all have the same intergenerational history, so it can't all be the same, right? Um, I experienced a kind of, like, I think, alright, so, yeah, there's a few things here. I would say that that dark night around 30 was a little bit of a mixed bag for me too, because I had been in this low grade depression, really anxious for a long time. In some ways, even though it was weird and scary at times and confusing, I also was experiencing relief for the first time in a really long time. And so, and I recognized that. I was very clear, like, as that rope was untwisting, I was like, whoa, things are actually genuinely finally shifting on a deep level. And I loved that. So, and it was, yeah, it was weird. And sometimes there were very big things that came up that were intense, they were a lot to deal with. And then it seemed like after, let's see, maybe like 3 years, 4 years of that, it started to kind of plateau a bit. It wasn't like there weren't more things coming up, but I do remember being on the phone with a friend at one point and being like, you know, I feel okay. And that was like a big deal, not just for that particular phase of my life, but for my entire life, that was a big deal. Like, I just felt like I was stable. I was happy. I was okay, like that was huge. And so I was grateful for that. And wasn't long from that point where something else started to kick in. And that's been more what I've been going through the last 3 years or so. And so it's I hesitate to say this because it basically sounds like my entire life has been a dark night of the soul. Um, it's been very intense. I don't know if this is really everybody's experience. But I would say the last 3 years for me have been like a very classic, really intense dark night that's been more intense than any of the previous ones. And I'm not all the way out yet, but I think I can start to see a light at the end of the tunnel, and I think I see what's happening, which is why I started to rethink a lot of what these dark nights were and the way it feels like, okay, I think I'm actually coming out of something that's been so normalized for so long. And it's tumultuous, it's intense. We're talking about trusting life. And I didn't trust life. So it's kind of rough, you know? Like letting those feelings come up, the fear, the frustration, the despair. That's been a very potent one, actually, is the despair coming up and the way that it is so destructive in its hopelessness. Um, yeah, like we're getting down to like roots, like real basic, can I really let go of control? That question. Is somebody there? Is there something there that I can trust instead of just trying to control everything?
Yeah. Just to say the place or the level, I'm not sure of the word level, but that question is being asked from the deepest possible place, isn't it? These are not intellectual questions. They're the whole body, whole organism,
Yeah.
existential questions. And it's interesting, I have had a sense of a deep trust in the process, in the unraveling itself, and the intelligence that is behind or implicit in that for a long time. And just this week, there's been a wave coming up of seeing the extent of my loss of trust from a very young age, and the grief that all of the stuff that comes with that, as you were just saying. And I get this sense that, of course, we cover this same terrain in terms of our own personal histories over and over again, right? We've had one life and one set of experiences in that sense, but the sort of perceptual angles that material is come at differ over time. So, for example, it feels like in the last few months, what's been moving in me is very much related to my nervous system wiring. And so that deep sense of loss of trust has been felt as a nervous system phenomenon, more in a sense than purely emotionally. And I think the other thing about going through this at different times is that the world is different, right? I mean, I think obviously, we've been saying this is nature. We're all implicated in that. Like none of us are outside of nature. And it feels to me like the depth to which things are now unraveling is different than it was a few years ago.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah. I feel like it's hard to know. It's like you go through this and it's like, yeah.
Because there is no map. I think whatever our sort of collective experience is, we're here for the first time. So
Right.
I think because a lot of this, it feels to me, is a coming to consciousness of what hasn't been conscious before, both individually and collectively. By definition, we're right at the edge all the time,
Yeah, that's right.
right?
Yeah.
So we can't possibly know what's going to emerge, half an hour from now, let alone longer than that. I mean, you and I have many times been doing whatever we call what we do together. We've been doing
Uh-huh.
sessions with each other, and we've had no idea what was
Yeah.
just about to come out. And, I mean, we've had that experience so many times. For some reason, I'm just brought back to that image that we started with of you in the therapist's office looking at the trees outside, and I know for you that your connection to nature and the natural world has been such an important part of this. Is there more that you'd say about what that's brought in for you?
That's a really interesting piece because I started practicing meditation at 18 kind of out of desperation, but I also really around that same time, because that was right around when I left home to go to college, and I guess I did it a little bit when I was in high school too, but, I did it more once I was out of my home. I just spent a lot of time just sitting alone in nature, wherever I could really access, like, natural spaces, and sometimes I couldn't, sometimes I was in urban areas and it was a little bit harder, but, just a tree in a park was enough for me, and I just I felt this really clear need to just even again, like, as a teenager, I felt it, this need to be in that presence, um, and for the longest time, I thought it was the meditation that kind of got me knocked over that threshold, but I had a friend say years ago, she was like, "Kristy, you used to just, like, sit out in the forest, like, alone and just listen for many, many years," and I did that partly because it just felt good for me. I just was so I was that twisted rope, and it was the one place I could go. There was no people in my life I could have this experience with. It was the one place I could go where it was really okay to be who I was, including being that twisted, contorted rope. To have all of the depression, the anxiety, all of it. Um, and I really recognized that fairly young, and so I just really naturally gravitated towards, natural spaces. Trees in particular were really I really felt that with, and it did take some time to realize the intuitive, um yeah, just the intuition that was guiding me the entire time. Uh, and it's interesting because more recently, I have started to look at this through the lens of um, coming to understand what the feminine actually is, that sort of feminine essence that people kind of always talk about, but really understanding that more directly in my own experience. And I just realize just more and more how much that feels like that's what this shift has always been about. And um, and that was always the kind of thing that I was moving towards, was that non that I don't even know, how do I say it? Like, yeah, just that spaciousness that wasn't judging me. It was really accepting me the way that I was, whatever that was in the moment.
That's so interesting. I've not thought of it as the feminine in that sense before. For me, often the phrase that comes in is it's the space of unconditionality. It's a felt, palpable sense of it being completely okay to be this here just now. And I love what you say about the how that includes the twisted rope. This isn't about this isn't about having to untwist that in some sort of conditional way. It's about the unconditional love, actually, that's here for all of that in those moments, that isn't us loving ourselves in some sort of quite narrow way, right? I
Yes.
think this,
Yeah.
and often I struggle to talk about it because it sounds like I'm talking about, oh, you just love yourself. And it's actually much more nuanced than that, right?
That's too active. That's too is the
Right.
way I hear that, This is like, there's just it's almost like the space that unconditionality, it's like just slowly moving more and more to the foreground, right? It's just like slowly
Yes.
taking over in this gentle, there's no forcing, there is no sort of active elements to it. It's just yeah, I don't know.
I mean, I'm your description of it, I can feel myself some emotion coming because that feels so much my experience of it, that there's just been this almost imperceptible kind of seeping in of this being loved, or this space, whatever we call that. And it's difficult to describe how much the opposite of pushing it is, right? I think it is the antithesis of empire.
Mm, yeah,
It's
yeah.
utterly inclusive. It's utterly not holding everything, and
Yes.
it also has my sense of it is that it also has some kind of immense compassion and love, and also a bit of a twinkle in the eye. Like it
Yeah.
could be
Oh,
quite funny,
yeah.
right?
Oh my god. Yeah. Oh my gosh, yeah. Yeah. And that's been like, the last few years, which, a lot about that, has been really, really hard for me. And it was only just very recently, like in the last week or 2, that I really started to see the thing that it was pushing to the surface. Because it was rough. It was definitely, I was going through parts where I was like, "What insanity is this? Is there some deity that likes torturing me?" Like, again, a lot of what I've gone through, it's not just been an internal process, it's been very external as well. Losing a lot, like virtually everything. Um, and then realizing what was getting forced into consciousness was this despair, this totally destructive despair that was rooted in a sense of total powerlessness. And finally really starting to see this pattern. And, the beautiful thing about that is that as that starts to come into view, again, like totally inclusive, this is included as well, this completely destructive, completely hopeless, just, uh, vicious sometimes despair is not, um yeah, like, I just keep wanting to say, like, it's not who I am, right? It's not, like, the core of who I am. It's a pattern, it's a thing that's here, and we include that, but it's been, like, running the show for a very long time, definitely way longer than I've been alive. And I now, in seeing that, am like, "Oh, this is foundational to empire, this despair, this sense of total powerlessness in the face of life," right? And
Yeah.
the amazing thing is that as that starts to move and to be seen, is I'm starting to feel what real power feels like. Not power through control, not power through force and violence, but real power, like power that's native to my system. And yeah, and I think it's just a good example of the way that happens, right? It just slowly kind of just seeps in and starts to surround the thing that's been there the whole time, but was not known, was not seen.
Such a beautiful description. My sense is that that what's usually happening is that we are intimately run by these forces like despair, and yet we're not, they're not fully conscious.
Mhm.
And it's this movement into a different kind of consciousness or awareness of them, as seeing them as for what they are, and are beginning to come into relationship with them in some way, rather than being sort of fused into our sense of ourselves. I'm reminded of a time a couple of years ago when there was a kind of futility or hopelessness that was surfacing for me in a really big way. And as it surfaced, it was very clear to me that there was a sort of dual thing going on. One was that society holds that kind of hopelessness and futility as, there's a taboo around that. And I mean, I know I shared some of this with you at the time, that there was a real sense of this more than anything else is what is shut out. And yet there is such deep futility inherent in the system of empire, right? I mean, even the fact of weapons is an obvious illustration of that deep, deep futility. And there was something actually really relieving about touching into that. I mean, obviously, it's very painful, but there was a real sense of like, oh, right now we're down to brass tacks. And sensing that in my system, I think it allowed me to start to come out from under, almost come out from under my own responses and reactions to empire and all the ways it manifests, which was a lot around hopelessness, collapse, fear, and as you say, a complete being completely cut off from my own native power. And my sense is that so many of those qualities have been twisted by empire, right? What we understand
Mhm.
is of what we understand as power being a great example of that.
Yeah.
Is there more that you'd say about that?
I think the only thing that's really coming to me is that, and I think this is that this is just what empire is just a large scale version, a collective expression of this same thing, right? That we are experiencing within ourselves. And again, like the way that the details of how each one of us might experience it, the words we might use, the images that show up, the particular sensations and things might vary. But the general pattern, especially I think, yeah, like you said, when you get down to the brass tacks of it, when you get down to these really fundamental layers, they're quite similar for many of us. And so it shouldn't really surprise us that our larger collective expression looks a lot like that, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And so I think of it as like, yeah, empire is this overcompensating, this twisted, contorted rope that we're all in.
Just before we finish, to anybody who's right in it now, what would you want to share?
Um, I think the thing that I could always tap into, because it was dark and yeah. I feel for anybody that's going through that. For how difficult it can be, I always feel like I have the experience when I'm coming out the other side that what is being shown to me is so much more, it's far more incredible and beautiful and awesome and um, profound than anything that my mind could have ever conjured up. And that I, I think just the thing that happens for me over and over again is like as I start to come out the other side, what I start to see consistently always blows my mind. It's always so much more profound, so much more beautiful than anything I could have ever imagined, and definitely anything that I could have gotten to if I had just controlled my way out of it, right? If I had tried to stop the process, if I had tried to keep everything together, if I had tried to not feel it, if I tried to distract myself, any of those things that I could have done to try to control this, uh, I really would have deprived myself of just something so magical, and incredible.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Maybe I'll just add that I feel like that's the thing, like, in the darkest moments that I could just tap into, where it was like, if I can just remember that if I can just remember that, then maybe I can just breathe my way through this, you know?
Beautiful. Kristy, thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah,
Really
this is great.
appreciate it. Bye now.